Hey, it's Andrea. Today, Wesley has a man crush. This episode feels like purgatory. And we ask the question, why did people think Jerry Lewis was funny? All that and more coming up.
Welcome to the TNG Podcast, the number one place in the Alpha Quadrant to geek out about all things Star Trek: The Next Generation. I'm your co-host, Shereese.
Hey, I'm your co-host, Andrea. Today we're talking about Season 1, Episode 4, The Outrageous Okona, written by Les Mention, Lance Dixon, and David Landsberg, directed by Robert Becker, and the stardate is 42402.7.
Can I add something to the credits?
Yes.
I also found online that the teleplay, which I don't know what that is, maybe it's like a screenplay, I don't know, was written by Burton Armus.
I saw that.
Yeah. So why we're excited about that, gang, is that Burton Armus was the inspiration for a creature named Armus in the Skin of Evil episode, which was Season 1, Episode 22, the episode where Yar died. And so, one of our guests had brought that to our attention. I had never heard of this guy, and now I bet I'm going to see his name everywhere.
Yes, I agree. I saw that name, and I was like, oh, Armus shows his face again, sort of. At least we see the name. All right, so here's what happens in the Outrageous Okona. As the Enterprise passes through the coalition of Medina, which is a little coalition of a couple planets, it detects a small cargo ship under manual control by its single occupant. The crew makes contact with the pilot, Captain Thadian Okona, who requests help to repair his ship. Captain Picard agrees, and the Enterprise tows Okona's ship while Okona is brought on board. The crew soon finds that Okona has taken a keen interest in the women on the ship, beginning with Transporter Chief Robinson, which is played by an uncredited Terry Hatcher.
Mm-hmm.
And that's where this story sort of starts. That's where the trouble begins, at least.
So first off, overall thoughts about the episode.
It feels like a Season 1 episode to me. Mm-hmm. It feels just sort of silly. The problem itself is like kind of dumb. Like the two separate men like trying to get Okona like into their custody because they have beef to settle with him. It's like it's kind of dumb. Like I feel like it's that sort of problem is like below the station of the Enterprise to have to deal with that.
Yeah, this episode feels very sitcom-y. And I don't know what category you would put TNG into, but it wouldn't be sitcom. Like it wouldn't fit in that category. So that's kind of what this felt like. I almost expected a laugh track to kind of pop up here and there. So we have this Captain Okona, who just reminds me of like Prince Eric from The Little Mermaid, but
yes,
in a more kind of scoundrel type way, less like I don't know, pure or something. But the whole time I was just waiting for him to burst into song.
Oh my God. Me too. Like I kept thinking he was, I just was waiting for somebody to be like, oh, you scamp, like in the middle of the hallways or something. Cause he's just a very like charming and charismatic and like bon vivant, like lives for the good stuff in life kind of a man whose job is just like, he has kind of a small job. Like he just is a cargo freighter pilot and just kind of like takes stuff like from one planet to another. He's basically basically like a truck driver.
Boy.
Yeah, he's a delivery boy.
Or a truck driver.
Yeah, he sort of is a truck driver.
A truck driver.
So
he's a truck driver in space.
Yeah,
he's a very charming, sexually healthy truck driver.
Yes, a man with a healthy libido, as Commander Riker says. So, just a teeny bit of trivia: William O. Campbell is the actor who plays Okona. He actually was shortlisted to take the role of Commander Riker.
Oh wow!
Yeah, and I
can see that.
Yeah, they have very similar, like, sort of body type and look. Height, like they're both really big men, but the role obviously ultimately went to Jonathan Frakes. And then when they have that little comedy bit, Jerry Lewis was supposed to be the comic in the holodeck.
That's why they did Jerry Lewis as an example.
He had a scheduling conflict and couldn't actually tape. He couldn't be he couldn't make an appearance. So they tapped Joe Piscopo, who was like famous at the time for like his Saturday Night Live performances, and he actually ad-libbed most of his lines that he had with Data. So that's kind of funny. But yeah, I just thought, why are you doing Jerry Lewis? And I realized it was sort of a nod to the fact that Jerry Lewis was supposed to be there. Yeah.
That makes more sense. So yeah, my overall thoughts about this episode, I agree that this could have been a season 1 episode. And I think that might be kind of a thing we say as we're going through. We'll kind of be like, ooh, that's season 1. And that, by the way, is like a bad thing.
Yeah, that's not good.
Yeah, this could have been definitely a season 1. And but you know what? Let's go through it. Let's go through it beat by beat. We'll talk about the things that we liked, if any. We'll talk about the things that we did not like.
I have a feeling this might be a short one because I think
it's going to be great. It's going to be a break from our hour and a half long interviews. It's going to be like a 20-minute episode.
Yeah, short. Only listen to this episode if you're like on your way to the grocery store and back or something, because we're not going to have much to say. This is not a road trip kind of a podcast episode. Because I kind of watched it just going, okay, so that happens. Oh yeah, so that happens. Oh, it's over. Okay.
Yeah, me too. And so when it opens up on the bridge, I am happy to say there was not a scant in sight.
Yay!
I was like, whoop, whoop. Yep, I think we are clearly out of the scant territory. They hung onto those uniforms and by scant, we mean those little tiny little skirts that the men and women would wear. Yeah, those things I think are season 1. So we're done with that.
Yay.
And then as soon as they go to like Terry Hatcher in the transporter room to kind of bring Okona on board or whatever, I was kind of like, I didn't know it was Terry Hatcher until we got in there, but I heard the woman's voice and I was like, what happened to Chief O'Brien? Like, I was so excited that they had finally brought him onto the show in episode 1 of season 2, because he becomes such a big character in the show.
Yeah.
He becomes a big like co-star. Like he's always kind of in the background, but he becomes a thing.
I don't know if he ever became a season regular. I don't recall seeing his name like in the opening credits. I don't know if he ever became season regular, but
yeah,
that's something. Oh, he does. Okay.
He does become a regular. And then he goes on to be on, I think, Deep Space Nine.
Yes, he does. He's definitely on Deep Space Nine. Okay. So they find this small ship that's having navigational errors. They do hail him. And I love that when the screen opens on the bridge of the Enterprise, you're just looking at Okona's butt, which is pretty funny. Like, he's bent over, he's cracking jokes. He's very roguish. And Picard is like, what am I looking at? I'm talking to a man's ass on my screen, but it's like 12 feet tall because that's how big my screen is. It's super weird. Right. And so they bring him on board. Did you notice before they bring him on board, they lock on a tractor beam. And I noticed a couple things right off the bat. Number one, Worf usually locks on tractor beams and he does it. He's like, beep, boop, tractor beam locked on.
Yeah.
This time Wesley does it. And I don't know if you noticed, but Riker's like, okay, easy, easy.
He was lining up the back of the ship to match with Okona's ship to tractor it. Supposedly, it sounded like to tractor it into the shuttle bay. But then when you look at the image, you're like, that ship's freaking huge. There's no way that's fitting inside the shuttle bay. And you're like, yeah, you don't need to be a certain like location or position to tractor. You just tractor things left, right, center, up and down. I mean, it's 3D space, right?
There's no gravity. There's no like air resistance. There's nothing.
So it was really weird. But then I also thought, I don't know if we've seen a tractor beam in all of season 1. So they might still be working out, just like with the holodeck.
Yes.
They might still be working out what are the rules for this technology we just totally made up.
100%. I think you are right about that, because the other thing I noticed about the tractor beam, anytime they did an external shot of the Enterprise, had Okona ship, that tractor beam is not the normal color and sound effect as the subsequent tractor beam like shots that we see, like as the season gets more mature. Yeah. And I was like, that blue is kind of the wrong shade. It's a little bit too green. Like, yeah.
I did not notice that.
Yeah. And a couple things too, I noticed like a little bit of that sort of sophomoric, like still kind of growing pains. Like when we get into the holodeck and the characters appear and disappear, they kind of like shimmer first, like a mirage, and then disappear. Where later, and I hadn't even seen that. Like, I did not notice that at all in like The Big Goodbye, or in Elementary Dear Data. Things just appeared and disappeared. This time they all kind of like shimmer for a half second, almost like a Romulan cloaking device.
Ooh.
That might be the nerdiest sentence I've ever said in my life.
Well, stay tuned, because there's going to be many, many more through the lifetime of our show, I am sure.
100%.
They're still growing in that. And so, yeah, I did notice that. And I was like, oh, that's really weird. And I just thought, well, maybe this is the first time they're busting this out. And then later on, we'll see like what you're saying. Worf does it. It doesn't matter where you are. You just beam, 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 and just like track anything from anywhere. And I also noticed later on when those two ships come to kind of like argue about who gets to keep Okona, both ships are positioned in front of the Enterprise, like side by side facing the ship. I was like, well, that's totally unnecessary.
Yeah.
Because they're not looking at them through the view screen.
Yep.
Like they're not looking at them through a window, right? They're looking at them through the actual, I mean, I guess it is the view screen, but they're not looking at them through the window where they can see out into space. They're looking at them through the visual communication. So you could be anywhere. They could be behind the Enterprise. They could be upside down. It doesn't matter because it's just an image being projected.
Yes.
So I thought that was kind of weird, but and I don't feel like we needed to see that either as an audience. Like sometimes we need that perspective of how far, how close, but I was like, we know that there's two ships. I don't need to see them side by side in front like they're raising their hand as students in a classroom.
I think it's a little bit of a scale thing that they wanted to show us. Like they wanted to show us just how small and insignificant those two ships were compared to the Enterprise. Because if you remember in the neutral zone, when the Romulan warbird decloaks, it goes like nose to nose with the Enterprise, and it is significantly larger, which tells us like, ooh, you guys better play by the rules, otherwise like shit can go kind of sideways really quickly. But these guys, and you're right, it didn't even need to be shown because they've locked on lasers. Like the lasers can't even get through our navigational shields. Like it's like a fly. That's what Worf says. It's like a glob fly, which is just like a gnat that's just buzzing around and being annoying. Anyway, but we get ahead of ourselves. So they bring Okona aboard.
That pretty much is the episode.
So thanks for joining us. Yeah. So they bring Okona aboard. He's introduced a bunch of people and he sees Transporter Chief Robinson, which I said is played by Terry Hatcher. She had a bunch of scenes cut from the final edit of the show. And she was very disappointed with that. So she specifically asked not to have her name attached to the show, which I think is really risky as an actress. Like you're trying to get exposure and you're trying to like build up your portfolio. I would want people to know, like I was on this project and this project and maybe didn't go the way I'd wanted, but like, it's like cutting things out of your resume. It doesn't seem to make sense.
I can actually understand that though, because I did have a lot of, friends who were actors or are actors or whatever. And I had this one friend who was an actress in New York, and a lot of the roles she kept getting were to, as she said, play crack whores. So it was always like, she would get these tiny, skimpy little dresses and they'd be like, okay, you're this drug addicted, whatever, and these were extras. These weren't like big speaking roles or anything, but she was always playing some kind of prostitute on a street corner or something like that. And she kept saying like, do you have anything a little bit less revealing? And they would bring out a skirt that's like half an inch longer.
Yeah.
Or do you have any roles that are like less degrading? And
offensive.
Like, no, like that's what they had for her. So she is no longer an actress. She's a teacher. But like my point is that it's easy, I think, to get typecast in Hollywood. And so in this episode, Terry Hatcher is just basically like seduced immediately. And the next scene you see her in, she's drawing him into her arms, and that's all she is. So I could see her being like, ooh, like in my next roles, I don't want them to think of me as that girl.
Oh,
like that's not the kind of role that I want to continue to have. So let's just not mention that one.
I can see that.
And I've heard actors say that. Like I saw behind the scenes of Jason Bateman from Arrested Development. And he was saying how the show he did before Arrested Development had typecast him. And they were all like, oh, we really don't want this guy on our show. He's not going to be funny. He's not going to be good. Like he's not going to fit because of what he's done in the past. And like that had held him back. And they gave him a chance. They for some reason, they finally gave him a chance. And then he obviously won the role and crushed it. So
yeah, no, he totally killed it. Yeah. You know what? As usual, Shereese, I take a stance, you explain it. And I'm like, oh yeah. Okay. Agreeable Andrea at the deck again. Just like, oh, you're right. But I guess maybe that's a good thing. I'm just open to other people's ideas and opinions. But yeah, I guess I could see that, because one of the notes that I did take about this episode was this is writing women poorly and not doing the women justice. The women in this episode are just playthings and objects for Okona, and they're convenient holes. They're sexy lamps. They don't even have really speaking roles
or names.
Nothing. They have no identity other than just being a sexy plaything, which is annoying, especially since I feel like we're trying to get over that hump in season 1. But this again is why this feels so season 1. So they're walking, Data and Okona are walking down the hallway, and Okona cracks a joke, and it brings up this discussion of knowing what humor is versus knowing when something is funny. So Data has this whole thing where he's like, oh, a witticism, a bon mot, like a play on words with a trick ending. And Okona's like, okay, that's the definition of humor, but do you know what funny is. And so
Mhm.
Data kind of goes through this whole rabbit hole, and this does become sort of a funny subplot where Data is trying to understand what humor is. And he goes to Guinan, and Guinan is like, seek a higher power, but in your case, maybe a stronger computer or something. So he goes to the holodeck, and then, Joe Piscopo is there as the comic, and he does the Jerry Lewis bit, which for the life of me, I cannot understand why people think that's funny.
You know what? I agree. Like, I remember watching Jerry Lewis when I was a kid,
Mm-hmm.
and I remember he was so funny, and I remember thinking he was so funny.
Yeah.
And as I was watching this scene, I was like, what the F was I thinking? Like, nothing about this is funny. And then I was like, is this just like do you have to be 4 to get this? And I was like, well, no, because he was like one of the biggest comedians around at the time. Like, he was huge.
I do not understand that.
This was his comedy. It was like slapsticky, make fun of the guy who looks and sounds goofy kind of a thing. And I was just
my
like,
eye rolls were so big. Yeah. I was like, it's not even okay.
Like, nothing about it is funny.
I could see Jerry Lewis being successful at the time because it was sensationalist type of humor. Like, stand-up comedy didn't have anybody who was doing like slapsticky, like falling all over the place and all that shit. And so I could see it being a little bit like a train wreck where people are like, this is a disaster, but I don't want to look away because I want to see like what's going to happen next. But like, listen, man, you did that bit for like 25 years. It wasn't funny in the first place. Like, it would be funny to my 4-year-old nephew. And that's about it. That's about it. Because, but yet, like, if somebody is a huge fan of Jerry Lewis and can explain to us why you thought he was so funny, info@thetngpodcast.com, because I'd like to know. I really can't come up with an explanation.
We missed the joke entirely. So
much like Data, we missed it.
So he goes, and we have this whole long thing with Joe Piscopo, and like over and over, Data's trying to get advice on like, how can I be funny? And honestly, the scene was very painful for me to watch because it just seems like it was just so painful. However, I do like at the end when Data sped it up, because that's exactly how I watch stuff now. I watch stuff in like 2x when I can. And so I love how Data's like faster, faster, faster. And I was like, yes, let's get through this scene. Woo!
You are becoming more and more like Data every day.
Every day. Thanks to COVID. More and more like Data every day. So I really appreciated that, because I felt like, okay, this scene is still going, and then he sped it up, and I was like, oh, thank God the scene is over. And one thing I actually do like, and this is probably, I only want to say 2 things about this whole subplot, because I don't think it takes much discussion. But thing 1 that I would love to say is that he says this thing that's so profound, and I think he says it to Guinan, where he says, or maybe he says it to Joe Piscopo, I don't remember, but he says he just wants to fit in. Like, that's the whole reason why he wants to be funny.
To partake with others. And I thought that was, you're right. So sweet.
Very sweet. He just wants to be a part of the conversation. He just wants to know why people are laughing when they're laughing, so he could just, be one of the gang. And I thought that was really sweet. His why is very like pure.
Yes.
And the second thing I'll say is I love that Guinan is trying to teach him about comedy, because Guinan is played by Whoopi Goldberg, one of the funniest people in the world. She is a stand-up comedian, and she's hilarious. So it was just like, oh, this is so funny that like one of the funniest people in the world is playing as somebody else who's teaching someone about being funny.
Yes.
In a super subtle way. So I just thought that was that was kind of nice.
You're right. And there is that little meta kind of moment when Guinan goes with Data back to the holodeck, and they're, Data is trying his comedy bit on the holodeck audience, and, they're laughing at every little thing he does. And Joe Piscopo is on backstage, kind of like giving the thumbs up to Data, like, come on, encouraging him. And Guinan goes, you did this for a living? And Joe Piscopo, as the comic goes, yes, I did. And I think that's pretty funny, because she's sort of deriding like this avenue that he's pursued.
Comedy world.
Yes.
Which is like exactly what she's famous for. These people are idiots.
Right. Okay. So while this is happening, a couple of ships, first one unidentified ship intercepts the Enterprise and locks on lasers, which we talked about. And it's
so funny. I've never heard that before.
I know. Well, did you hear how Worf said it? He's like, he's locked on lasers. It's not even phasers. It's like, what the fuck? Lasers. Yeah, it just sounded weird. Yeah, which I thought was funny. Yeah, it's like trying to kill somebody with like a Nerf gun. You're like, Anyway, so it's Debin from the planet Atlek, and he accuses Okona of being a criminal. And at the same time, a second ship appears, and it's Kushel from this other planet, and he is also accusing Okona of stealing this jewel of Thesia from his planet Streleb, I want to say. So you have these two men who are both arguing that they deserve to have custody of Okona because he's committed a ton of crimes, which actually puts Picard in a tough position because he's like, look, I have no jurisdiction here. I can't be deciding who gets you or what happens. And this is where I thought it really, really went season 1 when Devin reveals that Okona has impregnated his daughter and wants him returned so he can marry her. And I was like, this is some like 1970s shit right here. Like my honor is at stake. You've dishonored me and my family.
Really?
Yeah. Very. And I was like, ugh, in 23 something.
That's not a thing. But that's actually what they say. That's what they say. They say it's like an antiquated, like, they have a conversation after they mute screen for the 17th time where Troy and Picard are talking and they're like, oh, this very antiquated, like old school way of thinking is what this old morality is what's ruling them. And, and he's very serious about it. He will go to war. He will destroy everybody on his ship, including his daughter and her unborn child, just to get like satisfaction for his morals. And I think this kind of also goes back to, Uncle Gene. We've talked about Gene Roddenberry, who's not really my uncle. I just like to call him that. But
if he were my uncle, he would be the racist uncle that ruins Thanksgiving dinner. That's what I feel like he would be.
100%. But he'd also be very loving because you've pointed out that he's all into free love and whatever and open marriages and stuff like that. So I feel like this was also kind of like a bit of his influence as well, right? To say that thinking of, marrying someone because you got them pregnant is such an antiquated idea, and also like really like disparaging it. Because he's all about free love and open marriage and, whatever, it's very opposite to his worldview. But anyways, yeah. So you find that out and you're kind of like, so what? Who cares? Like, whatever. But yeah, it does put Picard in this really weird position because he's like, I'm not the judge and jury, but I'm not going to just be like, oh, you were here first. You take him. No, you take him. And he keeps going like, what is the crime exactly? Like, maybe we can work something out. What is the crime exactly? And neither man is like wanting to say anything. He's like, Okona, get up here now. Okona doesn't want to say anything. And it's like, oh my gosh. This is the drama part of the show.
That to me was so confusing where they're like, Okona clearly knew like what both men wanted and just offered nothing in the form of defense of himself or explanation.
I don't know why they're mad at me. I have no idea.
Yeah. And I went, what? Like, that doesn't seem like a natural reaction. I think it would be, Okona seems to be very, very used to like going at it alone, doing his own thing, not having to answer to anyone. And so I could see him, I think it would make more sense if he were like, it's a personal matter. I don't need to explain it to you. But instead of just feigning ignorance, which I thought was kind of dumb.
Which was really dumb. And then he's like, just let me go. Just let me go on my way. So his bright idea was just release the tractor beam. I'll hop onto my ship and fly away really fast and hope they won't catch me. That's like so stupid. It's not like you're going to another solar system. It's not like you're not going to be warping out of here. Yeah. You're just going to get like 2 feet and both ships are going to stop you. You're going to keep the conversation going. Like, and then they finally, I know we're fast forwarding to the end, but there's not much to say.
Nah, not really.
So then he's finally like, okay, he has this heartwarming moment with Wesley, who's totally enamored, by the way.
Oh my God.
He's just like, Okona's the best. He's so funny and he's so nice,
I could see, Wesley could be like, Okona is the bomb, or something. Yeah, whatever a 15-year-old would say in 23, whatever. It's like, he is, you're right. He's just like so taken in by this like roguish scamp who has his way with the ladies, who everybody loves him immediately. Like, that's everything Wesley wants to be.
Flow. He doesn't have to be tethered down anywhere.
Yes.
So he has this heart-to-heart with Wesley where Wesley's just kind of like, wow, I could never do that. I could never just be kind of like a rolling stone because I have friends and family and loved ones and I enjoy being a part of society, basically. And it kind of makes Okona think twice. And so he's like, all right, I'm going to do the right thing. Like, I'm not going to run. I'm going to actually stand and talk. And then Picard is like, all right, I'll beam you guys over to my ship so we can all have a conversation. And my immediate thought was, why the F didn't he do this in the first place?
Yep.
As soon as both ships showed up, like, that was out of character for Picard. It'd be like, what are the crimes? What are the crimes? And they're like, I'm not going to say. All right, go ahead. You two come to my ship. Okona, you come as well. We're all going to arbitrate this stuff, and y'all are going to leave me the F alone, right? Like he should have done that at the beginning. And then the way they did it too was so sitcom-y cheesy, where he was like, I know what I'm going to do. It's time for me to stop running, or whatever the heck he said. And then he's like, okay, let's bring him on the board. But he never explains what that means.
He does like the real world thing. He's like, I'm going to stop running and start getting real world, whatever. Like, it was so dumb. You're right.
But
it's so dumb.
Say what it was. He just said it in this mysterious way. And Picard didn't push him. Like, what exactly does that mean?
Also,
what exactly are you going to do?
Also, we quickly find out that Okona didn't commit either of the crimes that he's accused of. But he doesn't,
in a dumb way. He does that in a dumb way.
He doesn't even bother to be like, obviously I'm innocent of these crimes, and here's my explanation, my evidence. He's just like, okay, I'll marry Inara, or whatever the girl's name is. And he's like, I'll just marry her. It's like, so you're willing to tie yourself down to a life, to a woman
but he wasn't going to marry her. He just said that to make the other guy say something. So? Yeah, because he kept looking at him. He kept looking at him the whole time. He was saying, oh, I'll marry her. Come stand next to me. And the whole time he was saying, he was looking at him, and he was going like, no, you can't. You can't marry. Why not?
Yeah, Kushal's son.
Why not?
Yeah, Kushal's son.
And so I feel like all of that was just to, at least from Okona's point, was to force them to be honest instead of telling their secrets. Because he could have just been like, look, here's the deal. They've been sleeping together. I've been shuttling the two of them back and forth. This is like, he could have just spilled it all out. But instead, he played along and forced them to kind of admit what they were doing. So that way he still gets to be, he doesn't end up being like a snitch, right? He still kind of comes out being honest, an honest scamp or whatever.
Sure.
I don't know, the whole storyline
like a thief of the heart of gold. He's kind of Robin Hoodie. It's like that. Yeah, I guess that's true. A couple of quick things. So when Picard wants to beam the delegates aboard, he says, we're going to be at deck 14 conference room. And I was like, there's more conference rooms other than the observation deck? And there's, because any
people have to have conferences.
Hey, I guess that's true. If you have to have a conference or a study room, you can't just go into the bridge and then onto the observation deck. But yeah, anytime they have delegates, they always go to like the observation lounge right behind the bridge. And I was like, that's kind of weird that I was like, deck 14, that caught my ear. But yes, and then Okona is there trying to sort of,
manipulate the situation.
Exactly. And so Devon's daughter, I think her name is Yanara, she has this like very soap opera-y like tantrum where she's like, I'm not going to marry either one of you. I'm going to, right? And it's just so cheesy.
Goes, okay, I am going to marry Okona. Why the heck are you going to marry Okona? You all think he's the baby's father, so I will marry him. Okay.
Yeah, so is he not?
On second thought, I'm not marrying anybody. Okay. On third thought, I'm going to marry whatever, girl.
Yeah.
Like, get it
figure
together.
It out. Go.
But I don't know.
So it turns out that Okona has been shuttling the two back and forth. They're lovers. That she's pregnant with the Kushal's son's baby or whatever. So finally, Picard is like, "Cool, this situation is sort of sorted out. I'm going to leave." Of course, the grandparents to be start arguing about what planet they're going to live on, and Picard is like, "I'm about to peace out because you guys figured it out. Okona's off my hands. I want you all out of my hair.
I want you all off my ship.
Yes, please, quickly, please, and thank you." So Data is continuing his humor, attempt, and he's doing the stand-up routine, and he realizes it's not really working. And Guinan finally says, like, humor is not the end-all be-all way to like interact and be like part of a group, and maybe that's just like not your bit. So as Okona is, getting back onto a ship and taking off, and the other two ships are, taking off into the sunset or whatever, Wesley says goodbye to Okona, and he tells Data, like, say goodbye, Data. And Data says, goodbye, Data. And that kind of makes everyone laugh. And that was a little throwback to George Burns, the comedian. He and his wife had a comedy bit, and he would say goodnight, Gracie. And she'd say, goodnight, Gracie. So I love that they had like a little throwback. It made him laugh. And then of course, Data, took it a little too far and starts going, take my Worf, please, which was a very famous joke. Like, take my wife, please. And I thought that was genuinely funny. Like, you put Worf's name instead of wife. Like, that was funny.
That was funny. And I liked his comedy bit that he did with Guinan in 10 Forward too. Like, I thought that was funny. And I loved his like, hey, yeah. And exactly. With his arms moving and the way too big cigar in his hand. I just thought like, oh my gosh, this is so funny. But and that conversation they had too was really great, where Guidon's just like, that's not funny. No. And he's like, well, wasn't it a funny joke? And she goes, well, the joke was funny, but Data, it's you. You're not funny. And he goes, are you sure? And she's like, yes. And he goes, I agree.
Yeah, that was very cute.
I thought that was funny too. Where he was like, I agree. What do I do about that?
Yes, like, yes. He looked a little sad. Couple catches. When he got the cigar in the holodeck, he goes to 10 forward. He still has a cigar and he's doing his little bit for Guinan. And she's like, that's not funny. So it's like, have that cigar last outside the holodeck, which again, it's like that elementary Dear Data with the piece of paper. But throwback to elementary Dear Data, I was like, Data is smoking again and he needs a smoking jacket because that ash is going to get on his uniform. Get your Sherlock Holmes smoking jacket back out. Anyway, I was like, no ash on the uniform. But whatever, it's holodeck ash. It wouldn't even, whatever.
Right. It should only even be in the holodeck anyways. But yeah, the other thing about the technology that they're still kind of figuring out the rules in the universe is when they beam the delegates on, who, I guess maybe it was Terry Hatcher, I don't know, who was in the transporter room at the time, but she was. They go, they have no weapons. And I was like, okay, so here's the thing you guys may not know if you're listening, or you probably do because you're as nerdy as we are. But whenever someone beams into the ship through the transporters, their weapons are deactivated.
Yes, automatically.
So they can't beam in and just start shooting. Like, that's the whole point. That's a security feature. So you can't like, as soon as we hit energize, you're like, pew, 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 and you take over the transporter and beam all your people on. So your weapons automatically get deactivated, but I guess they hadn't decided that yet. Like, that's not a thing yet. So they were just like, yes, they don't have any weapons detected. And I was like, interesting. Okay. Because later on, it doesn't matter. You can have all the weapons you want. They won't work.
Right. This is very early season. They're still finding their like rules and their rhythm. It up. Yeah. They're still kind of deciding the rules of their universe. But even though there are some like discrepancies between like holodeck stuff and tractor beams and things like that, it still is like held together in such a cohesive piece that like only in watching these episodes, like for the review, that I have to watch like very, very closely because I like the little background details. And I was like, oh wait, the computer voice is a man for a second. Wait, the images like shimmer before they disappear on the holodeck. Wait, like, but just as a casual viewer, like I wouldn't have picked up on that.
Nope, me neither. Yeah, me neither.
Anyway, well, I'd like to not revisit this episode because it's kind of like a C- episode. It's like not great. It's not super offensive. It's just kind of like sitcom.
Yeah, it's not bad. It's just not good.
Yeah, it's purgatory.
Yep, it's purgatory.
It's a purgatorial episode. I just made up a new word and we're gonna start using it. All right, Shereese, do you have any final thoughts on this episode before we throw it away?
Yeah, my final thought was the same as yours. Let's never do this again.
Sounds like a plan. So next week, gang, we are talking about season 2, episode 5, Loud as a Whisper. Can't wait to talk about that one. We'll see you next week.
Bye, guys. Thanks for geeking out with us. Be sure to join the crew at thetngpodcast.com to be the first to know when we do our live shows or host events exclusively for our members. We'll see you next time.